Hi listeners, Jason here. PHSCon 2024 was nothing short of amazing. We had 400 community members come together, both in person and online, to rapidly progress our understanding and practice of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. Over the 2 days, we laughed together, we were inspired, and we learnt. If you missed out, don't worry, on-demand access to content is now available at phscon.com. Plans are already underway for a bigger and better PHSCon back in Sydney for 2025. So save the date for next year when we return to a larger venue on June 19th and 20th. Now, on to this episode.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle? Or should I say Joel?
Joel. Yeah, I feel like, so for listeners, we are like first week back from the conference. This episode will be a few weeks after that, but just for continuity reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been telling people, like, you know how when you get back from being on holiday and your brain is trying to just remember all the work things, what you had on, what were your priorities, you know, what's everyone else doing, what do you need to be across. So I've got that going on, but without the rest and recovery that happens when you're on holiday.
Yeah.
So I'm confused and tired.
I remember you saying the week before the conference, kind of like the Thursday, Friday, you feel like everything's coming to a halt, like all the projects, everything the team was working on is getting put on hold for the week while we go away to the conference. And largely, I think most of our team was just able to focus on the conference itself, which was good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I likened the conference to a school camp in that we had, 16 of us colleagues all there. We're eating together. We're staying at the same accommodation.
Yeah, we weren't sleeping in bunks though.
No. That would have made it more fun, but
I'm sure that it would
sleep.
not have made it more fun.
Although I don't think,
I can't think of anyone in our team who would have enjoyed sharing a room with each other.
No, but then some of our team were playing up and not sleeping, and that's kind of like a school camp as well, right? Like,
well, that wasn't anybody from my team, Jason.
it wasn't. Well, I guess I'm across all teams. But
Yeah,
sales and marketing.
all and none.
Yes, they don't know how to rest and recuperate properly. But we're going to. This is coming out of order. We're actually recording this before we do a reflection podcast recording with Liz that will air like the week after the conference for people playing along from home.
No, the
week and a
second
half.
week after. Yeah.
Pretty close though.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks to Liz for not only chairing the conference but recording an episode with us so quickly.
Well, she couldn't really say no after she called us out for not
having her on the podcast, and we'll explore that with her. So again, if you've listened to the Liz episode and now listening to this,
sorry
one,
for the lack of continuity.
Yep.
Let's talk to our guest.
Yeah, okay, yeah, because we're going to do lots of reflecting.
We sure are.
Yeah.
We don't need to do that here now.
No, that's right. But
tired and confused is how I am.
Okay, and it's our first podcast episode, so let's get back on the bike.
All right.
So let's introduce our guest. She is an experienced researcher, analyst, and communicator in a specialist area of inquiry, including work stress, national policy, digital communication management, and gender equality. She led the 2023 National Review into workplace discrimination for pregnant persons, those on parental leave, and parents returning to work. She is the Research Fellow for Justice and Society at the University of South Australia. A warm welcome to the podcast, Dr Rachael Potter.
Thanks for having me.
And Rachel, thanks for having such a normal name that is very difficult to butcher.
You're welcome. Thanks for my parents. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Potter.
Yeah.
Rachel, what podcast do you like to listen to?
I like to listen to quite a few, but one at the moment I really like is Desert Island Discs on BBC. I'm not sure if you've heard of that one, but it's a UK-based podcast, and they have amazing guests that come on, and they have to talk about different music they'd take to a desert island and different items, and through that they able to kind of discuss their life stories. It's a really beautiful podcast, and you get really great guests on there. So it's
yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah, it's like that sort of standard conversation question. What would you bring with you? But yeah, turning it into a a history exploration. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
We'll review and come back to you on that one.
Yeah. See what you think. Yeah.
So tell us about your professional career, please.
Yeah, so my background's in psychology. I did my 3-year undergraduate at UniSA, and then I went into an honours year, and I was very interested in workplace psychology. And I remember distinctly hearing Professor Maureen Dollard speak at the showcase for the different topics you could pick. And I was just so interested in that area. Previously, I'd done some placements in organisational psychology, but it wasn't really my jam. So hearing about her values and what she kind of wanted to do, I was very keen to be involved. And so, I did my honours, and then I went straight into a PhD, kind of just fell into that area and really enjoyed the research side of things. So, I've done my PhD, I guess it was probably about 5 years ago now, so I'm still considered an early career researcher. But essentially, I really love anything to do with improving mental health at work, and have done a lot of work in the space of policy and looking at the work health safety regulatory framework that we have in Australia. So that's been my kind of strong interest, I guess.
Yeah, great. Well, plenty in common with the topics that we talk about on this podcast then. So fantastic.
Yeah, and working with Maureen, who we're still yet to get on the podcast 3 years in, but you're going to help us out with that, aren't you, Rachel?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. We'll see what we can do.
Nice one.
Yeah.
So tell us, what are your main areas of research at the moment?
Well, I've kind of got different streams. Obviously working in the psychosocial safety climate global observatory, we do a lot of work with businesses and building up the evidence around improving the psychosocial safety climate, so as we call it PSC in organisations. So that's really looking at those upstream factors that come into place, and really trying to build systems for people and improving their work health safety rather than just individualised approaches. So we do a lot of work with policymakers and different organisations, which is really interesting. But something that I've kind of always had a strong interest in, as I just said, is that policy space. A lot of the work that Stavrool Aleka and Adisha Jain have done in the UK and Europe, that was really lacking in Australia. And so when I did my PhD, I kind of completely changed my topic about 2 years in, because I was just so drawn to that space. And it's such a important reflection on society, I think, if you look at how we construct policy and problematize issues in that. So I was guided by a colleague called Dr Valerie O'Keefe. I'm not sure if you've heard of her, but she really taught me a lot about work health safety and how to position psychosocial risks in that. And so looking at the research that was done, there was not really any national review into the laws or looking at evaluation. So I tried to really build up that area within Australia. And because of that, it has been, had led to some positive outcomes, I think, in terms of policy changes. And it kind of closely aligned to what Mari Boland found in her review, which is that we really did need a regulation in place. So that's something that, it was a very strong theme in my research. But aside from that, like you said, I did the gender equality piece for pregnant women and parents and a few other different streams. But I think essentially my research always looks to, share the voices of people in society and really look at the system that they're working in to try and change things long term, not just like on an individualized issue or problem.
Yeah, and we need policy and, national kind of processes or impetus, for a lot of these things, right?
Yeah.
What are your views in Australia? Obviously, we've got Safe Work Australia, which provides guidance to the states regarding things like model codes of practice, model legislation. How do you feel about the state-based kind of regulations and guidance that we have? Do you think that helps or hinders the progression of psychosocial safety in workplaces?
Yeah, I think one thing that came out of my research when I did my PhD was that we really need to have a more consistent approach throughout the jurisdictions. Whether that's, I mean, Australia's a very large country, obviously, and we do have those separate jurisdictions, but we do need consistency across them. So I think just having that communication across jurisdictions and trying to have a consistent approach, which is what I guess Safe Work Australia try and do. They bring out the models and then the model codes, model regs, and then people can adopt them, is something that's important. But that said, each of our jurisdictions do have different cultures, different sectors that are more prominent. So maybe they do need to have a bit more of a different approach. But certainly for things like having X amount of psychosocial inspectors, we can see that some states and some jurisdictions are doing that more than others. So we'd like to see certain things more consistent, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you say Australia's a large country, right? But what are we, about 24, 25 million people?
Geographically large.
Geographically large, yeah.
In terms of
dispersed, yeah.
Okay, square meterage. Yes, yeah. Because I was going to say the UK, right? Like 80 plus million people there, and you've got one regulator. But not, like you said, the states here. In fact, Victoria, talking to Amy Salmon at the conference, they've got 30 psychosocial inspectors, like specialists. And that doesn't even include the specialists who are advising the psychosocial inspectors either, right? Of which there's more. So we actually have more psychosocial inspectors in one state than the whole of the UK, which has 80 million plus people. So it's really amazing to see what Australia is doing on the back of the regulations. But definitely one of the consistent bits of feedback we hear from companies that we work with across different states who operate across Australia is that there is some confusion regarding how certain states have adopted it, or waiting for Victoria to publish their regulations one day. What are the differences? And it'd be so much more cohesive if the harmonised legislation was adopted in a harmonised fashion.
And was actually harmonised.
And was actually harmonised. Or as Joelle likes to say, harmonised, schmarmonised.
Yeah, definitely.
So the reason that I reached out to you to come on the podcast was that you co-authored a paper called National Policy Index for Worker Mental Health and its Relationship with Enterprise Psychosocial Safety Climate. So can you tell us a bit about what was driving that particular project? Yeah, so I guess the main reason I started this project was because if we look at the space of the literature on policy and what's being done, a lot of that stems from Europe, some in Canada, but there's a real lack of, I guess, global investigation in this space, and there's certain countries that would really benefit from understanding what happens in more progressive countries in terms of this policy space. So it's just about sharing and understanding, but there's a big gap here, and I thought, well, I'd done a literature review previously, and I'd found a small amount of papers that looked at studies that evaluated policy, and most of them were from Europe. So I did kind of the groundwork there and saw that was an issue. And so we really wanted to do like a bit of a blueprint, a map of what's going on globally, see what the laws are doing, where's there's gaps, where can people learn from each other. But also there was another component that was to create a tool that could be used to assess the policy landscape going forward and just tracking if there's progress over time. And we could then validate that tool using PSC to see what was happening in organisations. So from that perspective, it was quite a unique approach. Yeah, so really looking at having a consistent way to evaluate the maturity of public policy globally. Yes, that a tool that could be used over time that was more general, that could then capture not just legislation but different forms of policy in terms of if there's sector initiatives or certain other things there that could help. What were the most important predictors of having a good psychosocial safety climate, essentially? So we started off, we
used a tool that Stavrola and Adisha had first developed a while ago, and updated that to look at different forms of psychosocial risks and hazards that exist. So we kind of did a real comprehensive survey, if you will, on all these different issues, like the barriers and the drivers of psychosocial risk management in that country. So we could really get a deep view of what's going on. And so then from there, we could then whittle that down to look at what are the strongest predictors of what's going on in organisations. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. As part of your literature review, did you also connect with some of the authors of the paper? I'm just thinking back to our conversation with Kevin Teo, where they looked at, that might have been one of the European papers you were talking about, where they're looking at the impact of regulations in Europe.
Yeah, well, so on the paper when we were developing the tool, we certainly had a range of different academics review that. It was very collaborative, and then also tested it in the field to get some feedback on that, and looked at what was kind of done before. So it was definitely building upon what had already been done, but just in a bit more comprehensive and capturing issues that are more relevant to this point in time, like digital communication or isolation because of COVID, the COVID pandemic. But looking at those elements just so it's a bit more up to date. And then we've got a really great advisory board associated with our research centre who also can provide feedback, and they did that really well. So you were comfortable then rolling it out globally.
Yeah, no, absolutely. For those listeners playing along from home, probably worthwhile digging up the Kevin Teo episode as well. It's probably a good precursor to that, because no doubt that would have factored into your literature review. Can't remember the other authors that were on that paper, but from memory, because it was, I think, a couple of years ago now, it was looking at the impact of regulations on how companies adopted psychosocial risk management in Europe.
Oh, yes. I know this paper. So I think it was 2022, if I'm thinking correctly. And we used that paper within ours actually to help validate our tool. So we're very aware of that. Was a great paper, and also showed that legislation and having those kind of policies in place are so important for what happens in organisations. So we used that paper to further test ours, and those authors, most of them were also involved in this project as well.
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah.
So what were your main findings?
Yeah, so we were able to get 45 countries involved in the project, and from the descriptive kind of review of
So Rachel, before you move on, how do you get 45 countries involved?
Yeah, that's impressive.
And who? It's obviously
blast
not
past that.
Joelle and I weren't involved. So, who from these 45 countries were involved?
It took me a very long time to get 45 countries involved. And I can't take all the credit. I mean, I have wonderful contacts through Stavrola, Adisha, Loic Leroux, she was also involved, and Ord, who's a union member as well in Europe, union researcher. So I pretty much used all the contacts I could, and involved a lot of emailing and hustling for a long time, and trying to get it into newsletters like the European, EWASHA newsletter, and just everywhere I could, to be honest. I was obsessed, and trying to target. We wanted a real tripartite view of what's going on in that country. So we wanted that, expertise or insights from, people from the unions, policymakers, academics, employer associations. But we did find that it was more difficult to get employer associations and trade unions involved. A lot of our expertise or insights from the study came from people involved in legal aspects or academics, but they must have had expertise or been an expert. So we had to be very choosy about who we allowed to complete the survey and results we kept, because as well, we had, I think, 164 complete surveys, but I will say that sometimes a survey was completed by maybe a whole group of people in a very prestigious institution in like Latvia or somewhere like somewhere that was very prestigious. And so one kind of survey response counted for a lot. So it does not really matter, I think, in this sense about how many responses we got to the survey. It was because it was reflective of large groups at times. But we had some very amazing participants that provided insights that we were very confident, could share their expertise. And I think as well, we got a lot of qualitative responses I haven't looked at yet too much, but it showed that even things asking about the law or what's in place, it's so subjective and just so interesting how people perceive it. Someone might perceive, certain things as being, that's the law, that's in place, it's how we do it. Another person might see it completely different. So we also had to look at ensuring that there was, a unified and, collective view about what's going on in that country. So that was very important.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
Sorry, Jason interrupted when you said 45 countries. So we were getting into then.
I think that we're like...
No, it is impressive. Yes.
Yeah.
Very
I probably blocked it out.
Sorry to relive that trauma with you.
That's okay. At the moment, we're actually collecting a second wave, and we've got a research assistant who's doing a wonderful job doing what I did and collecting all the data, which I take my hat off to her. Just seeing her go through it again, it's quite a hard thing to get people involved, especially when you're in a different country and you're emailing, But anyway, we did it, and it shows it's an important issue if people are responding. Yes, and what was your question again? I've got.
Was the findings.
The findings. Yeah, we'll get there. So one part of the paper of the study was a very descriptive review, and I forgot to mention this as well. The ILO actually commissioned part of the study, so we wanted to provide a report for them as well. So this study exists in a report format that's a bit more industry focused and an academic paper. So, but regardless, both have this descriptive policy review in place, and we were able to look at, what kind of psychosocial hazards and risks were prevalent across the world. Across certain regions, what were the common barriers and challenges or enablers for implementing policy or conducting psych management strategies, and people's views on certain issues, like if work health safety people were trained in this area, different types of sector initiatives. There's a whole range of different things we asked people. So that was the results. And what we found was for all of the psych hazards, they were scored quite high. So people kind of were saying a range of them, most of them are a concern. There's no one was saying that things really aren't a concern in terms of the different types. But the most prevalent were the harassment, discrimination, and violence. They were the top global concerns, and they also were the ones that are most regulated. But we saw also issues such as digital communication, work-life balance, are also major issues. We also found, because we did a bit of a heat map with the legislative coverage and policy coverage, and it's quite patchy, so we can see throughout the world which countries need a bit more development, which are a bit more kind of advanced. And one thing that came out was there needs to be more advancement of training for work health safety and HR persons in this space. That was a big thing, even though it was seen as a very high priority, mental health at work. This wasn't always translated into a policy priority or a training priority. So that's a major outcome. And then, like I said, we did the tool validation as well.
Yeah, that education one was something that I think Carlo Caponecchia and us, we identified at a similar time. And, we need to bring up the profession in this space, because if you're operating in health and safety now and you have been for more than a year or two, you probably have no formal education on psychosocial risk management, and you probably have no experience actually running through kind of a psychosocial risk management process within your organisation either. So we've got people who aren't educated, aren't experienced, so they've got no awareness or competence. So there does need to be some pretty quick gap bridging, particularly in now regulated countries like Australia, where the regulations are actually gone in front of where people's competence are as a profession.
I mean, something I've observed, I guess, is like from a public policy perspective, we have the work health and safety framing of psychological health and safety as kind of viewing work as a social determinant of mental health seems to be a lot more advanced than other areas of public policy in Australia in relation to mental health, where a lot of that is still very much focused on treatment providers and getting people access to affordable care, which is certainly important. But I think from what I see in sort of the media and in terms of how ministers are talking about things, there's still very much that focus on individual mental health as or individual ill health rather, instead of actually looking at like what are the broader social determinants and what are the decisions that we're making as government in terms of other areas of public policy, and how might that actually be creating or facilitating poor mental health outcomes across the community. I'm not sure if I have a question in there. It's just musings.
No, that I agree. So you're saying that that approach does fall more on the outcome of ill health rather than prevention. Is that?
Yeah. So I think like on the one hand, we had post-pandemic, all right, well, we're going to cut back on the fortnightly payments for people who are unemployed or disabled. And then on the other hand, we're going to be, saying that we're putting all of this money into mental health intervention. Well, if you actually, if people had some income security, we'd probably have lower levels of mental ill health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. So once again, seeing how the policy decisions really impact things. And
Yeah, talking about that, have you got any thoughts on the work cover reform in Victoria?
Well, probably not enough to confidently, make a
that's a cautious response.
But I'm aware that, I don't, things seem very difficult over there in terms of the system and not being able to put in a claim. I think there's a lot of issues I think that needs to come about, and it's unfortunate that it's meant that the regulations there as well haven't been introduced when they were the first people that proposed and put out that kind of consultation piece for people to comment on. So, yeah, it is. I think it's a very difficult issue, and it seems very convoluted.
Yeah, the reason it comes to mind is just on loading onto what Joelle was saying. It seems to be a bit arse about let's make it harder for people to make legitimate claims for mental injury caused by work, but let's not bring in regulations that are designed to keep people safe from mental injury at work.
It's an interesting choice, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's great, but well, hopefully things get better. That's all we can say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what action, I guess, and this is what researchers want, right? We don't just put things out into the world. And when I say we, I mean the royal we, as in you.
Yeah, not you.
What would you like to see as a result of this great research that you and the team have done?
I think we have taken some action actually from the research, which has been a positive one. We did a roundtable in Tokyo at a conference there, and we brought together all these amazing regulators and some academics from different countries around the world. So targeted developing countries more in the space, and more kind of advanced countries in the space. And we had a 2-day roundtable to discuss some of the outcomes and to try and build up a narrative and discourse around these issues. So that was very positive, and one that was I hope, very well received by the people who attended, to try and understand what was happening in their country, how it might work, and just to get people thinking around commonalities or ideas. And just a very rare thing. It doesn't really happen very often, I think. We're very siloed in our countries and our way of thinking. So it was very good to open people's eyes up. And there was a statement that people signed as well to commit to moving forward in a more kind of unified way. That was a great outcome. But yeah, I think that's something I would like to see, is to keep conversations happening, so it could lead to better policy development. And also from this, because what we did was showed that legislation and policy was directly related to PSC. In the European context, we use the data from the ESTA survey in that sense. It gives a lot of weight to having legislation. So I hope that creates an impetus or encourages different countries or jurisdictions or whatever to develop policies and to see and have comfort that it is having a positive effect. Of course, there's lots of other things going on. It's not as simple as just having a policy in place, but it is actually an important factor, and it is doing something really good. So that's another thing I'd like to see, come through from it.
Are you got no follow-ups, Joelle?
That was your question.
I know,
Jason.
it was my question, yeah. But you're the policy one. You're the one that wanted
Am
Rachel
I?
to come on, because you love talking about this sort of stuff.
Do I?
You always have an agenda.
Do I?
Yeah.
Agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like a question that came up actually to one of our panels at the conference was, is psychological health and safety a first world problem? So I'm interested in your perspective on that as well, given the global view of the research that you've taken. Like, what is the view in developing countries around psychological health and safety?
That's a great question.
That's a really good
Thanks,
question.
Jason.
Yeah, well, I think I think it is a global concern. We're very fortunate in Australia to have such great policies and, have all these great resources. But over what I've seen through the research is that it is a high priority. Doesn't matter where you live. We know that mental health isn't a crisis across the world. That's been well documented and put forward in one of the Lancet papers recently. And that we know that work and work conditions are an important aspect of psychological health and a way to build up psychological health. And so many people people work all around the world. So we're targeting work conditions. I think it's incredibly important. Doesn't matter which country. I think depending upon the resources, there are certain, there's ways to help people build up capacity for certain countries, and then to proceed with more advanced approaches, like in countries like Denmark and Sweden, they have had the laws in place for a while, and now they've progressed to doing more kind of initiatives to build upon that. So that will differ greatly from maybe some countries in South Asia who haven't had that yet. But I think what I saw from my paper and from the roundtable is everyone's on the same page trying to push forward and improve things in mental health at work. And even in countries you might perceive as a bit more kind of developing or getting there, they're still doing amazing things and they still want to improve people's work experience, which is just amazing, I think. And they're just so passionate about it. So yeah, I think it's a global thing. It should be a part of all work and all work health safety. That's my view.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And I think probably not many people would have the opportunity to be able to provide that type of insight about, that global perspective. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
And I concur. Yeah. So I guess at this point in our interviews with guests, Rachel, we like to ask them to think about the future. So if you were to think about the future, what would your hopes for workplace mental health be?
I did give this question a lot of thought, actually. It made me really think about things. And I think for me, what I'd like to see, and you've touched on it before, is that worker psychological health is not seen as a wellbeing initiative or an individualized issue anymore, or an EAP problem. I get very frustrated with that these days. It should be seen as, how do we create a system in an organization to support people's mental health at work? And looking again, like the principles of PSC are so vital here. And you can do all the hazard assessment management you want, but if you don't have a system of communication and prioritizing and prevention and involvement of staff, it's not going to happen. So I feel very strongly about that. Is yes, the regulations are wonderful. That's such a massive step forward, but we do need to look at upstream factors and look at this as a work health safety topic, not just a nice to have wellbeing HR thing. It should be integrated into work health safety. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think some people were surprised, actually. There was some people who came to our conference last week, and, usually at a workplace mental health conference, you'll hear from, various EAPs. You might hear from some people offering mindfulness apps. You'll hear about yoga.
Mental health first aid.
Fruit bowls, mental health first aid. And they're like, for 2 days straight, all we've heard about is that work is a determinant of mental health and what employers can do to actually create better work so that people aren't harmed. And we give them the opportunities to thrive. And so, yeah, again, we completely agree with where you want workplace mental health to head. And it was really nice for some people to reflect on that and go, oh, yeah, maybe EAP isn't the only thing that we should have as part of our workplace mental health strategy.
Yeah, and it's surprising how much it still comes up as that is their strategy to psychosocial risks or hazards. You hear that, we've got an EAP. But yeah, it has to be more about prevention now. And given the severity of people's mental health, I think I'd love to see things shift in the other direction. And I think people are trying. But yeah, it is, I think it's a big gap is that knowledge of how to, that capacity. But there is a lot of evidence out there now. And I'd just love for people to maybe access that more and engage with the evidence-based practice to how to implement that.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, last question for you today, Rachel. Do you have words of advice for listeners who are interested in working in the field of psychological health and safety?
Advice, I think it's really important if you're working in this space to always take a step back and look at the broader system and the broader picture, and to not have blinkers on looking at one workplace or one, to think about how our society functions. It's so interesting and so interrelated, our culture, we're a capitalist society here. How does that interplay with things? I think just to have a bit more of a open mind to look at how things work together, and not to have a very individualized approach, just to keep your mind open to how things work in a bigger sense. That was something that I personally learned a lot from my PhD, and I think if you come in with that mindset, it will get you further. And
so thinking about the broader system that's
that's right. Yeah, just being aware of it, I guess. A lot of people don't think that broadly. They might just think, like we were saying before, yoga and EAP. But if you look at why things the way they are, with a bit more of a critical eye around things and how you might be able to change things or, change systems, that would be my my advice. Yeah.
And that was the question we ran out of time for Christina Maslach. I don't know if you remember seeing that on the agenda. What are the societal systems that we need to think about in trying to curb burnout? because you can talk about individual job crafting, you can talk about team, organizational, but then what are the broader systems that create organizations to operate in, like you say, a capitalistic way that doesn't necessarily consider the health of their workforce as important as returning value to shareholders. So we'll have to get Christina back on the podcast, obviously, to answer that question.
Get Christina on and ask her about shareholder primacy and how that influences burnout.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
Rachel, it's been a fantastic discussion. It's always great to get academics who really love their area of research and are able to articulate it so well. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm supposing there's going to be a link or something to...
Yeah, we'll pop a link to the paper in the show notes for listeners who want to have a read of that.
And any other resources, Rachel, that you want our listeners to see, feel free to send them through to us and we'll make sure that they appear in the show notes.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me and inviting me on in the first place. And I'll try to get Maureen on for you.
Yeah, we'll see. We've been working for it 3 years. We won't hold our breath. But
maybe it will happen one day and it'll be great.
One day, we'll have a special celebration. I think our marketing team will, have to do something special for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe animated GIF. Yeah, confetti.
Balloons. Oh, you love a confetti gift, don't you?
I love confetti.
She would love that as well.
Thanks again, Rachel. All right, well, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. So remember, we do record these over video when we have these great conversations with our guests, and you can catch those videos on the Flourish DX YouTube channel. We also take snippets of the best of these clips, and we put them on the Flourish DX LinkedIn page if you want to follow along there. While you're on LinkedIn, Joelle and I frequent there way too much, so you'll find that we're pretty responsive if you drop into our DMs. So thanks a lot, listeners. We'll catch you again next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.